Hello and welcome everyone. Good afternoon from me. It might be good morning or good evening to you. Welcome to this discussion on audacious philanthropy in education. We'll be discussing how innovation, risk, and partnership have led to transformational impact. My name is Shafi Musaddiq. I am the news editor at Alliance Magazine, and I'm really excited for today's session. We'll be exploring the driving forces and the learnings behind Ahlan Simsim, the single largest early childhood intervention in the history of the humanitarian response, created by the Sesame Workshop and the International Rescue Committee when they won the MacArthur Foundation's inaugural 100 and Change competition back in 2017. There'll be some links shared in the chat so you can learn more. To discuss all this and more, I'm really delighted to welcome some of the people and the organizations who have worked tirelessly on this initiative. With me today are Joe Elias, Senior Director, Program Management and Sesame Workshop; Kristen Molyneux, she is the Vice President of the Program Strategy and Learning at Lever for Change, a non-profit affiliate of the MacArthur Foundation; and Marion Stone, she is the Regional Project Director of Ahlan Simsim at the IRC. A few things before we begin, just some housekeeping for us all. There are two ways you can get involved. So firstly, feel free to introduce yourself using the chat function. That's at the bottom right of your screen. You should be able to see a little speech bubble. You can also use this chat if you're having any issues with your audio and video. Our team are on hand behind the scenes if you need help. You can also put questions to our panelists at any time using the slider Q&A. That's on the right-hand side of your screen. As well as asking your own, you'll also be able to upvote others if you'd like to see that question asked. We'll be keeping an eye on this throughout the webinar and selecting questions to put to Joe, Kristen, and Marianne during the Q&A. Should you wish to do so, on the bottom left of your screen, you'll see CC a button, and that should be used if you want closed captioning, in English and several other languages. We encourage you to really use this if you really need to, so it's worth using. Right, before we begin our panel, I'm going to invite you all to watch a 3-minute video on Ahlan Simsim's intervention in early childhood to get a real sense of what we're talking about today. We'll watch this and then we'll dive straight into the discussion.
أنا صار لي تقريبا من وقت من 2012 جينا من البيت بسوريا تدمر يعني، وجينا من الحرب جينا لهون ب 2012 وعايش بنفس الخيمة تقريبا. عندي 4 أولاد يعني شيء يعني المأساة اللي عشناها احنا ما حبيت أتذكرها يعني بالأسف. إذا الولد من هلا بيشيل هم هيك معناته ما له مستقبل يعني.
يلا شوف الكنز. سندويشات. سندويشات. 2-1. بدنا 10 حبات بلدنا.
الطفولة هي كل شيء. يعني هي مرحلة مستقبل الطفل، هون هو الأساس. يعني مش بس إنه أنا بدي أجي وبدك تتعلم هول الأحرف والأرقام وخلص بنفل على البيت.
إيه صار لهم سنتين بيروحوا على مركز أهلا سمسم يعني. في أنا ابني هذا وطن يمكن قلت لك كان نفسيته تعبانة كتير يعني، كان مرات يصير نفسية ما بعرف إنه فزع وما فزع ولا شيء. عم يرتاح نفسيا يعني قلت لك من الشيء يعني انه بيجي بيروح لهنيك لبرا بيرتاح اكثر، بيجي بيروح على المركز تبعنا اهلا سمسم.
يعني الدعم النفسي كتير مهم بهذه المرحلة. عم نحاول دايما نوفر بيئة آمنة لإله. هذا البرنامج هو موجود بحياتهم دايما، متكامل بين المدرسة وبين البيت.
اولادي اهم شيء انه اول شيء العلم. يعني انا عشت بظروف صعبه يعني. ادور انه حياه افضل يعني.
I'm sure you'll agree that was an incredibly powerful video. So, to our first panelist here today, I'm going to introduce to you all Joe Elias. Joe is the Senior Director at Sesame Workshop for the Ahlan Simsim initiative that supports children communities in crisis in Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and the wider Middle East. He's over 2 decades of experience in project design and program management with a focus on programming for children, women, refugees, and vulnerable at-risk populations. Joe is a humanitarian, public health, and early childhood education program professional and has been privileged to have worked in and for communities in sub-Saharan Africa, Melanesia, Middle East, and North Africa, as well as Western Europe and North America. So, Joe, Ahlan Simsim is now the largest early childhood intervention in the history of humanitarian work. How does the adaptability and longevity of funding impact the work you're able to do?
Thanks, Shafi, for that question, and thanks everyone for being here. And marhaba to you all as well. First thing I wanted to just acknowledge is that for those of us who've been working in early childhood development and early childhood, we don't take for granted the importance of early childhood. We know that when it comes to development and learning, you can't start early enough. You know, I just want to really acknowledge that some of the things we live and breathe every day that we stitch into our work, you know, that a child's brain develops faster in the first 5 years of life than any other time is the time where they're, you know, forming their sense of self. And, you know, when we think about that time when their brain is most affected by the environment, we also take into account and try to understand how does the child's experiences of prolonged exposure to conflict or trauma directly affect and inhibit their healthy brain development. And if that's the case, and when that's the case, there are lifelong, you know, repercussions. And so to your question around, you know, adaptability and longevity, we really we really believe that flexibility and longer funding runways, you know, allow us the space and the time to experiment with what works and what doesn't work, so we can course correct and evolve to have the greatest impact. When we heard that the MacArthur Foundation's first ever 100 and change competition would provide $100 million to a project, that would make measurable progress in solving a critical problem of our time, we just knew we had to go for it. So 1,900 applicants, and 18 months later, we were the last one standing, combining the proven impact of Sesame's educational media with the international rescue community's expertise in communities to create Ahlan Simsim, or Welcome Sesame in Arabic. I just also want to mention there are several things that an investment of this scale allowed us to do. Firstly, because it was that size, it got so much attention, which raised awareness for not only the need, but also the opportunity, and the tremendous void. I'm not sure if many people know, but globally, only 2% of humanitarian assistance is dedicated to early childhood development. Secondly, it allowed us to plan over 5 years and be much more ambitious in what we could build, because so often projects are funded only for 1 year or one project, without the ability to scale and to look forward. And finally, it allowed us to dream bigger and to invest money in research. We took about $15 million of that 100 million and invested it in research, including being able to engage with NYU Global Ties for Children, because there's such a dearth of research on what's most effective for children in crisis contexts that research we really believed was a key deliverable. And it's informed our Welcome Sesame work in other crisis settings. And we wanted to make sure that others were able to learn from it as well.
I want to ask you something else as well, Joe. In addition to being the name of the locally produced TV show, the Ahlan Simsim initiative has reached millions of children in the Middle East with crucial early childhood resources. How have the IRC and Sesame Workshop integrated educational media with direct services to drive impact and learning?
Thanks, Shafi. I just want to call out Nada, the teacher who was featured in the video, the IRC teacher, who said, childhood is everything. And I really, we we live that, we breathe that, and I just think it's important to kind of note that, because when you realize that at the outset of the Syrian crisis, and that kind of everyday experience, Sesame looked hard to see what we could do for those children who left everything behind, including schools and access to education. So we partnered with the International Rescue Committee to reach children at scale by combining IRC's expertise in communities affected by crisis with the proven impact of Sesame's educational media. Ahlan Simsim is a life-changing initiative that provides children in conflict-affected regions the support they need to learn, to grow, and to thrive. Ahlan Simsim is also built on input from local early childhood development experts, psychologists, researchers, linguists, and creatives, and from children and families themselves. Ahlan Simsim's focuses on the needs of the whole child as well. We think from taking into account everything from health and developmental milestones to foundational skills and the emotional ABCs, like identifying and managing big feelings. Ahlan Simsim meets children and families where they are as well, like from classrooms to health clinics and learning centers to TVs and mobile devices, by integrating direct services for families in crisis with engaging educational media. For example, children attend preschools where lessons integrate Ahlan Simsim curriculum and educational content like videos and storybooks, while parents and family members receive phone calls and WhatsApp messages with resources they can use at home. Families they gather around TVs, mobile phones, computer screens at times to watch Ahlan Simsim. And these familiar Sesame characters that we know, like Elmo, Cookie Monster, and Grover, they join these new characters and these new friends on Ahlan Simsim, like these new characters, Basma, Jad, and Amira, who have storylines that children can uniquely relate to, learn from, and take comfort in. One of the things that we're extremely proud of, like I mentioned before, is that from research and evidence, we know that Ahlan Simsim has a proven significant impact on children's language, numeracy, and social and emotional development. Last year, NYU's Global Ties for Children announced the results from two randomized control trials. One was in Lebanon, the Ahlan Simsim 11-week remote preschool program with educational media integrated into the curriculum. That program produced statistically and developmentally significant impacts on children, particularly for literacy, numeracy, and social emotional skills, comparable to a year of in-person preschool programs. These findings, they demonstrate the power of integrating educational media with early childhood development services, with significant implications for delivering early learning in humanitarian and other contexts, like climate-related displacement, where traditional in-person schooling isn't possible. And we believe by sharing this research and the lessons learned from our program, we're laying the groundwork for others to scale, adapt, and build upon these models for other refugee and host communities.
Thanks, Joe. That's really, really great overview there. I am going to move on to our second panelist. I want to introduce Kristen Molyneux. Kristen serves as the Vice President of Program Strategy and Learning at Lever for Change, a non-profit affiliate of the MacArthur Foundation that emboldens donors and problem solvers to think big and leverage investments in effective solutions to accelerate social change. In this role, she oversees the award management and social impact teams at Lever for Change, as well as the organization's learning agenda and Bold Solutions Network. Previously, Kristen was the Senior Program Officer for MacArthur Foundation's 100 and Change initiative. That's a competition for a single $100 million grant to help solve a critical problem of our time. Kristen has also co-developed, designed, and launched the inaugural 100 and Change competition. She also oversees the MacArthur Foundation's $100 million investment in Sesame Workshop and the IRC, and its $15 million investment in Nest 360. So, Kristen, I want to ask you, in just 6 years, Ahlan Simsim has successfully worked to address at scale the gap in education for children in crisis contexts with encouraging outcomes. As we look towards sustaining current solutions and addressing problems we have yet to face, how can funders support and encourage innovation and collaboration?
Great. Thank you so much for having me, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's here today. And I'm excited to talk about Ahlan Simsim with my colleagues who I've been working with for 6 years. So it is a little bit crazy, I think, for all of us to imagine that it was 6 years ago that we ran the first 100 and Change challenge, and that this grant is coming to a close. What started out as a vision to create 4 seasons of children's television content to reach 6 to 9 million children and provide direct services to 1 million children has now transformed into 9 total seasons of the Ahlan Simsim series, reaching over 27 million children across the Middle East and North Africa, and reaching over 3 million children and caregivers in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq, far exceeding the goals of the initial investment plan that MacArthur invested in. This was well beyond what was anticipated in awarding this grant, but while these successes were built partially on the initial plan that Sesame and IRC put forward, they were also born out of innovation adaptations, and a collaborative spirit across the entire project. So how can donors specifically help encourage innovation and collaboration? I would say that there's three critical items. First is trust. Trust-based philanthropy, I know, is a topic of conversation right now, and it can take a lot of different forms. But one version is that the solutions should be driven by the organizations that are closest to the work. And funders should trust those organizations to execute based on their knowledge and their expertise. I would also say that while donors need to open space for a trusting relationship with their partners, organizations also need to dare to step into that space with donors who are looking to build a trust-based relationship. What I would say to donors is you can't expect organizations to have it all figured out on the day that they hand over a beautifully written 5-year work plan. And you can't expect an organization to jettison their programmatic priorities to implement your vision for their organization or your vision for a solution to intractable and very difficult and complex problems. And what I would say to organizations is that most donors don't expect you to have it all figured out. So when you run into issues or challenges, often the program staff at foundations or the donors may be some of your greatest allies in helping to solve problems. Challenges and obstacles present an opportunity to step into that learning and trust-based space with donors together with their partners. For example, when MacArthur awarded $100 million over 5 years, with children to support children in an evolving crisis setting, we knew that the team had milestones and impacts that they wanted to achieve, but we also knew that the path they set in 2018 and 2017, 2018 would inevitably be different than the one that ultimately led them to achieving those milestones. As a donor, we were there to help think through those opportunities and to help them pivot priorities as needed. So as a donor, if you want to truly support innovation, creativity, and collaboration, then you have to build that relationship of mutual trust. The second thing I would say is time. Short grant cycles tend to keep organizations focused on the next set of fundraising that they need to do, the materials that they need to create in order to secure the next grant, in order to keep their programs alive. Giving organizations multi-year grants allows them the on-ramp for hiring. And I think Joe mentioned this a little bit in his comments. It also helps the organization build and stand up thoughtful systems and processes and gives them time to implement, learn, and then adapt based on those learnings. If you're always stuck in an implementation cycle and never given that time to learn and pivot, then the impact that you're going to have is going to be less. Even more critically, I think time gives everyone a seat at the table. The issues that we are working on are not easy issues. They are dynamic and they include a variety of stakeholders and are full of systemic challenges and complexities. So often bold solutions really require bringing key stakeholders together to solve problems. And many times these stakeholders have competing priorities. So for anybody who's done this type of work, you know how difficult it is. And if you don't have a seat at the table, or if people think your seat at the table is going to be gone in a year because your funding is going to run out, that impacts your ability to lead and to really bring coalitions together in order to have impact. And I would say the third thing that donors can do is really focus on learning, adapting, and pivoting with their organizations. And all of the work that we do, we encourage a learning posture. We know that programs are going to run into challenges and new opportunities are going to surface while organizations are executing the plans that they may have put together, 2 years before or a year before. So we look for ways to understand what it took to succeed. What did we learn from the places where we failed? And what are the learnings that we didn't anticipate but have ramifications for the larger field? For example, nobody could have expected or anticipated COVID-19 back in 2017 and 2018 when this plan was being put forward for executing a $100 million grant. But the team continued to ideate and look for ways to pivot. And as a foundation, we supported that ideation with the goal of using that moment in time as an opportunity to test and learn in a dynamic and real-time setting. So if you have mutual trust and you value learning, then partners are going to feel safe stepping forward to identify new ways to collaborate, to be innovative, and to be creative. I'll stop there. I'll pause there.
No, that is great. I really want to ask you about when thinking about funding, the focus is often on the dollar amount and not on the length or type of support. So what are the other factors funders should consider if they want their support to have the greatest impact?
Absolutely. So the way you give is as powerful as how much you give. And in a sector where average crises last for years, and the average grant is $50,000 over 18 months, long-term funding, adaptable or unrestricted funding support, and true partnership can leverage more dollars and drive more significant change. So longer time horizons, as I've already mentioned, is one way. While not all donors can provide very large grants, they can usually provide funding on a longer time horizon. Organizations are at once focused on having outsized impact while also being worried about getting the next grant that will ensure continuous programming and will keep the lights on and ensure that they can make payroll. So providing that multi-year grant can provide a bit of peace of mind. It allows the organization to count on that money and reduces time spent thinking about how to fundraise for that gap next year. Additionally, no organization has all the money they need to implement the programming that they want and also to be innovative and creative. There's always ways for organizations to do more, and organizations often want to do more. So your funds can really help to support any number of pillars of work, such as advocacy, research, learning, as well as implementation. So these incremental add-on investments to larger programs can really make all the difference. They can provide additional flexibility, especially when maybe restricted fundings or core funding is not really available to try untested ideas or to innovate or to ideate. And that incremental and add-on funding to large projects is a great way for funders to leverage those larger investments that may already be having an impact. So for example, for this grant, Lego add-on funds supported the creation of a new character, Amira, who has become a core and central character to the Ahlan Simsim show due to her popularity. USAID funds are now supporting rollout of school readiness programming in Iraq. And early GSMA funding provided opportunities to test mobile phone messaging for parents in crisis settings. Those learnings those learnings provided critical adaptations that were necessary when COVID-19 hit. So each of these additional funding projects have had an impact above and beyond what MacArthur anticipated with their initial project. So the takeaway message is really that donors can work with partners to find ways to leverage existing work rather than starting completely new work that the organization has to try and take on. I often hear donors who don't want to invest in large programs because they don't know how or if their funding will have an impact, and they want to be the first at the table for new and innovative ideas. But leveraging existing investments can be a great way to ensure that your funding does have impact. And we all know that whether it's a $100 million grant or a $50,000 grant, there's more work that can be done. And the work is not going to end with that one grant cycle. So for donors who are interested to find ways to support Ahlan Simsim and other projects, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to discuss how we can help support and bring add-on funding to this type of project or others.
Thank you, Kristen. You've given everybody so much to think about. And speaking of which, a reminder to everybody in the audience that if you do have a question to put to Joe, Kristen, or Marianne coming up, please put them in the Q&A section on your right-hand side, and we'll get to them after our last speaker, who I will introduce to you now. So Marianne Stone has served as the Regional Project Director for Ahlan Simsim since 2018. She's been with the ISE since 2012, working as head of programs in Lebanon and Iraq and business development in the DRC. Marianne is a social impact designer and holds multiple master's degrees in strategic design and leadership, as well as a bachelor's degree from UT Austin. Marianne, crises aren't going away, and they will continue to affect all our work in unexpected ways. How do you revise and reframe on the fly, sort of reshaping an initiative when crises like the COVID pandemic, which Kristen mentioned earlier, hit?
Yeah. Thank you, Shafi, and thanks for having us. This is a really fun group to talk about all of these things with. As Kristen said, we've been working together for a long time. I think first, crises, as you said, they're not going anywhere, and we know that they're evolving every day, whether it's a crisis like what's currently going on in Palestine and the Middle East or climate change. We know that we need to be ready to adapt. And for us, I think our central pillar that we thought about every step of the way over the past 6 years is like what Joe said. Childhood is everything, and children have always been at the center of all of our decisions. And so I think having that North Star in terms of what it is that we were trying to achieve as a vision and a goal, understanding that the MacArthur Foundation and our partnership with Sesame would allow us for this flexibility to make it work as we go was really critical for us as implementers on the ground to know that we had this space and flexibility to make changes, sometimes on the fly and sometimes with a bit more planning. I think we have so many different examples, but COVID has been mentioned a couple of times, and it was definitely, I would say, a real inflection point for us as a project. Unexpected, global, all children in the Middle East, as well as globally, were experiencing out of school learning loss, and we really had to step back and ask ourselves, okay, this is what we had planned, and we're no longer going to be able to do this, at least for the foreseeable future. So how can we make sure that we still are making meaning for children and caregivers and MENA? And I think I just wanted to reinforce a couple of things and then give a bit of color in terms of what we did. One, the flexibility, the trust that we had from the MacArthur Foundation, I think really was the foundation of our ability to make these decisions and changes. And it really drove this culture of design, innovation, learning, and creativity. And so it was there that we had these reflexes to say, okay, this is what we have and this is what we're seeing. These are the needs that children have in Lebanon or in Syria or in Iraq. How can we use this to redesign the content, information, ways of working that we already have in order to continue to reach them? And Joe has already alluded to this, and I think Kristen already mentioned it, but what we did together was be able to bring a year of learning to children in only 11 weeks remotely. And truly, I think none of us really thought this was beyond even our biggest imaginations. I think it's a really good example of how this kind of audacious philanthropy can have both expected and really unexpected, surprising and really meaningful impacts. And it means that we were able to reach caregivers, children, teachers, make those connections between people that we were all starved for during COVID, and also have this amazing impact of outcomes, developmental outcomes and statistically significant outcomes that we saw with the remote early learning program that we implemented for Syrian children in Lebanon. And that's really just one. I mean, I think that's a good example of really like the impact that we saw with our ability to pivot. But it's just one example of how we've adapted over the past 6 years. And I think it's an important one because we also learned a lot from it. We drew from different pieces of curricular content, the mass media content that Sesame has created to be able to design RELP and really make that a meaningful program. And we continue to use those experiences to adapt. And learn and iterate and ask ourselves, how can we use technology for this, or what is the most appropriate way to reach caregivers? And I think the biggest example that we see currently on how we really want to continue to expand this and make impact is the conversations that we're having with Sesame on collaborating for design for what's currently going on in Palestine, and how we can really use the experience of the last 6 years to have an impact for children who are going to be experiencing, as we know, immense amounts of trauma and learning loss for the coming years. And so I think that these examples and how we've worked together thus far is a really inspiring way and story for how we can take that and say, okay, this crisis is happening now. Let's talk about what we can do about it and really be action oriented behind that.
Clearly, the headline here is partnership. So how can organizations build and scale their partnerships for long-term, lasting impact?
Yeah. I think some of the things that Kristen and Joe have already mentioned are critical here. One, the time, the trust, the empathy, the things that we've already been talking about, because Ahlan Simsim has been created in partnership, and it succeeded also in partnership. I mean, we are two different organizations, the IRC and Sesame Workshop, and we came together with our different set of skills, driven by a commitment to outcomes for children, and we were able to, as we say all the time, like come together for more than the sum of our parts. And I think that's like the testament to the start of this, and it was the spark. And what we've taken with that is expanded it, I think, also beyond, you know, our wildest imaginations and dreams. We work with civil society locally, we work with national government and local ministries, we work with national broadcasters, we work with technology companies, we work with the teacher in the video. Like, these are all our partners. And I think we come to the program with that spirit of nobody has all of the answers. And so only together as a movement for children are we going to be able to make the lasting change that we're trying to make here. And I think that there's a couple of things that have been critical to that along the way. And some of them are not dissimilar to pieces that Kristen has already alluded to from the perspective of a funder, because we talk about funders, but for us, I think the MacArthur Foundation is very much also our partner. You know, we bring problems, we talk about challenges, and for me, like that's a testament to being a real true partner in how we're moving this forward. I think when we've been doing, for example, the work that we've done in collaboration with local ministries in MENA. So we've been working with ministries of education, ministries of health, ministries of social development, and we really come to those partnerships with the same spirit. It's a collaborative partnership. We're designing things together. We're asking ministerial colleagues, civil society, local actors, where is like the main crux of the challenge that we're seeing in countries for children and caregivers that could have an impact on a child's life or on a caregiver's life. What do we bring to the table as Ahlan Simsim as a project, and what does the ministry or the local partner bring to the table? And we co-design everything together, which over the past 6 years has really shown how we can foster ownership and a real like deep understanding of the system and the needs that children have, so that what we're doing and the investments that we're making are individually and collectively meaningful. So I would encourage people who are thinking about partnership or partnership with funders or partnership with local actors to really think about that collaborative spirit and draw also upon some of the things that Kristen has said around the perspective of the funder, because I think we've also, with the time scale that we had, been able to cultivate these trust-based partnerships with all of the different actors and really bring ourselves together under the umbrella of let's make change for children. And for me, that's been really critical as a part of our overall success.
Before I head to the Q&As, I'm going to give all three of you a question. And maybe there's three different responses, who knows? What did the original $100 million grant enable the Ahlan Simsim team to achieve? And now that the original funding has come to a close, what does the future of Ahlan Simsim look like? Any of you?
Should I can go first. Do you want me to go first?
Jump in.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Okay. Well, you can't see in this tiny thing behind me, but this is our journey for the past 6 years. It's like we have this like journey of all of the things that we've achieved. That's a very long answer, Shafi. So I'm going to give you a couple of highlights, because I think we've achieved some of the things that Joe and Krista have already mentioned. The 9 seasons of the show, new characters, these amazing partnerships, and really like building the collective effort for change for children in MENA. And we have the numbers behind that, right? Like the 3.2 million children and caregivers in MENA. I think there were 27 plus children that watched the show across the region, 3 randomized controlled trial impact evaluations, learning, succeeding, failing. Like there's so many things I think that we've achieved. So I like, this project brings me so much joy, so I could go on that question forever, but those are some highlights in my mind. I'm sure Joe and Kristen have others. And maybe I'll pause for that, and then we can, so that they can fill in the blanks of what we've achieved, and then we can circle back to the second part. Maybe that will be less confusing, I think.
Yeah,
Joe,
it's been amazing working, like Marianne said, it's been amazing working with true partners. You know, MacArthur has been a true partner to us. IRC has been a true partner in this work. And I think that what it does, it facilitates and it encourages others to join our partnership and join the work that we're doing. Kristen mentioned, other funders that we've worked with, and I think, Lego Foundation, and they provided some really important complementary funds and significant support and partnership in this space too. And I think that what we really think as part of the success is this kind of joining of the movement of not just the funding but the work and the partnership kind of approach to it. And I think that that's really not to be, that's something that we're really kind of trying to lean into. So when, in this stage of the project now, we're thinking about, who have we been working with, who have we been partnering with, ministries, community groups, community leaders, funders, other NGOs and other actors in the space. We're thinking along the lines of how do we facilitate the success of that kind of network of partnership and trust and movement into what we really think is important, and is kind of reflecting the needs of what's next. Because to one of the questions in the chat is we're constantly thinking about being child-centered, about ensuring our missions are delivered, and that we're doing no harm. That when we talk about risk, when we talk about working in this space, it's really, those are the driving forces there. But I don't know, Kristen, if you wanted to add anything else to that. We're like friends, Marianne, Kristen, myself, so we're kind of like, we just bounce off each other's ideas.
I think the one thing I would add too is just one thing that I think we didn't anticipate, but we hoped for at the beginning of this was what would Ahlan look like at the end of this cycle, and that hopefully it would have scaled, or there would be potential for it to scale into ministries and with other partners. And I think we didn't know what that would look like. And I think one of the fascinating learnings from Ahlan is that it is scaling in different ways, but in each context, it's different and it's different components, right? And Marianne and Joe can speak more eloquently to this, but in some countries, it's partnership with the Ministry of Education, and pieces of programming are being built into the education system. In other countries, it's more a partnership with Ministry of Children and Welfare, right? So, and there are different pieces of it that are being rolled out there. So I think again, to kind of go back to that flexible and adaptive part, we didn't know at the beginning the level of success that this project would have, and kind of being embedded and having that long-term impact over time. And we didn't know what that roadmap was. And I think there was an initial roadmap, and obviously that changed over time, because part of it is finding those opportunities within these partnerships to really integrate and collaborate, where people are coming to the table as equal partners. And that's going to look different in every single country, in every in every specific context. And so I think those were also exciting things to see evolve over time.
We have so many questions in the Q&A for all three of you. I don't think we've got time to go through all of them, but we're going to try and get through as many as possible. I'm going to throw one from Gina. I hope that I said that correctly. This one's about funding. So as a funder, what were some of the unexpected challenges that you ran into, and how did you manage those challenges? Any of you?
I can start. I mean, it's an interesting question, because I feel like a lot of this is, it may be more inside our organization or inside funder network. So I think one of the challenges was just we were giving away the largest grant that MacArthur Foundation had ever given, or anyone in philanthropy had ever given. And so that was just new. How do you manage it? How do you execute it? How do you support the organizations? What does that look like? And also being very clear from the very beginning that it was going to be a one-time limited grant. And so that's very different than typically other programs within the foundation, where you might have a program that goes, it might be a program that's in perpetuity, or it might last a much longer period of time than 5 years. And you might be funding a lot of different organizations that are all working on the same topic. Here we were funding one single organization in this space, and managing that, I think, in terms of how people understood what we were doing or trying to do, while also giving the team the space they needed to figure out how to ramp up. And I think that was a big initial challenge. And I think that building that trust early on was a big step for both parties to take, knowing that it was going to take them time to figure it out. It's kind of, I liken it to getting a grant this size, or even, you know, maybe even a $10 million grant size is kind of like the dog who caught the car. All of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, we put together this plan, but now we've got to do it. And that is a very different, you know, you have to shift into a very different mode of thinking and planning. And so I think that was a challenge that we worked together to kind of to solve and say, here's what we're going to do. Here's where we're going to need to rethink and pivot. And just kind of building those types of relationships took a little while for us to get there. And I think, but it was worth the effort. So I'd say those are a couple of the larger challenges. Otherwise, from a funder perspective, this has been a relatively easy road to walk. It's mostly just trying to keep up with the team and know what they're doing, so that when people internally at the foundation or our board of directors says, hey, what's going on, I have a intelligent answer to give them.
Another question from Carl. How do you think about risk, and are some types of risk less palatable than others?
Marianne, do you want to start on this one? I mean, I have a couple of ideas.
Risk, yeah. I mean, it depends on what kind of risk we're talking about, like risk as it relates to financial investment. I think one of the unique things about this project is, or at least I speak from my very personal experience, working in the sector for a while now, is that when you combine the things like long-term trust, the open conversations that we've had over the past 6 years, you do reorient the way that you approach and how you think about risk. Because I think for me, there's the risk of not acting quickly enough, which also oftentimes butts its head up against the regulations, needing to get approvals, like the lack of flexibility. And for me, that is a huge risk here. And, you know, when we're talking about children in need and crises that continue to evolve, new ones pop up without us anticipating them, like we need to be able to act quickly and adapt. And we've been able to do that here because we haven't had to think about this other side of the risk coin, given the way that this project has been structured. So I think, like, for me, that's one way of thinking about it. And that has a trickle-down effect in terms of how we think about the way that we do strategic investments, the way that we look at when something's not working, what do we scale up and what do we scale down? But it kind of all flows down from our ability to operate in a more flexible way because of the lack of, or the different framing, I would say, that we've been able to apply to the word or concept of risk.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you know, combining what you know, Kristen said with what Marianne said, you know, the ability for us to partner in a trusted philanthropy, you know, space with MacArthur, with the IRC, and you know, meant that we could continue to do our work and focus our risk more on that approach that I mentioned earlier about being child focused, about ensuring our missions, our collective missions are, you know, being exercised and, you know, and doing no harm. The other stuff, you know, we could pivot and change, you know, when it came to working with Kristen and, you know, and the MacArthur Foundation, and you know, when Sesame needed to kind of pivot and change with IRC and vice versa, like that all kind of became just natural because we kind of created the partnership and the collaborative environment that kind of ensured that when it came to risk mitigation, we had to kind of work at that, you know, at the different levels there.
We have another question related to funding. Have you managed to raise next phase funding for your ongoing work post the exit of this donor or the end of the 100 million? And this person asks, have you solved the issue? Is there still need? Is there still need for your work? I'm not sure. Probably might phrase that a different way. Have you managed to fundraise? as a recipient of a big grant that might have made you look well funded?
Do you want me to start, Joe? Well, I think the most important piece of that question is the need, which isn't going anywhere. And we see it evolving every day. I mean, we all experienced it as a collective when COVID hit in MENA. Unfortunately, crisis is kind of for many people here a day-to-day reality of what they experience, and that impacts children, in particular younger children, disproportionately. And so we haven't solved the issue, but I wouldn't ever say that we are going to solve the issue. I think our role as a collective is to continue to make sure that we are solving for the issue as we move forward. And we are fundraising for some of the things that Joe said, mentioned earlier, around thinking about what we've achieved and how we can get an even bigger return on the current investment. And I think that's been our approach all along, and it's a testament to our focus on partnership, how we work together, the centrality of content and the creation of all of the resources that we've been working on for the past 6 years. All of that kind of feeds into how we approach the ongoing solving of the issue. And yeah, I mean, I think there has been when you think about $100 million, it sounds big. And when you think about $100 million across multiple countries in MENA, alongside of all of the amazing content, 9 seasons of a television show, the amazing content that we've created, and then you divide that by what has now been 6 years, actually, it's a substantial investment, but there's room for more, I would say, and there's room for more impact, and that's our goal, is to continue that impact for the coming years as partners and also with our partners in MENA. Joe, I don't know if you have.
Yeah. So I think that, you know, the need is it's chronic, right? It's not acute. It's a lived experience. One of the things I think we've been given the privilege and opportunity to do through this over this program and this grant is that Sesame and IRC has just become naturally collaborators in what to do and think about what to do next and how to best support the needs of communities. And that's meant that we've had these conversations and workshops about lessons learned, about how to position ourselves to, again, support those communities and needs. And that has allowed us to think about the next generation of Ahlan Simsim, which really is an opportunity to build on existing partnerships with local actors, government partners, think about designing new programs, improving, the opportunity to improve existing ECD health, vocational, educational infrastructure. And we also want to think about continuing to create, the research-based television show, Ahlan Simsim. And so thinking together, like, what does it mean to develop and expand the audience? What does it mean to design specifically for contexts and situations where children are really in need and their families, And then part of this kind of next generation of Ahlan Simsim approach is about this local demand for quality ECD, sorry. We want to elevate that importance of ECD at the individual, local, regional, national, and international levels. And that's going to continue. That's a continuing need. We need to power for, stronger and sustained, demand for quality ECD. And so, the work we're doing together is about, creating and sustaining ECD champions. And so we need to kind of, we need to select and then, we need to be part of that selection and, the empowerment of that kind of ECD champion approach. We also still think that we need to continue contributing to the evidence base on what works for children and families. There's still so much work to do, in all of these areas around media production, local demand for quality ECD, research and learning. So, there's this approach where we think that pulling together and trying to get a total investment of about $10 million annually for 3 to 5 years is really going to power that next generation of Ahlan Simsim, where we can reach an additional, 10 million people with direct services and another 25 million, with mass media broadcast. So we're really kind of in that natural collaborative space to think, what can we do next?
I will throw one last question. I'm going to throw this at you, Kristen. It's from an anonymous person, but I think it's a really good question. As a non-profit looking for trust-based long-term funding from funders like Audacious Project or 100 and Change, what is one piece of advice you would give us to set us apart from other organizations?
I think the biggest thing that you can do is be your authentic selves and stay true to your North Star of the impact and the work that you're trying to do. Where I often see organizations struggling is when they've agreed to do this for this donor and they've agreed to do this for this donor, and then this one and this one, and everybody's doing separate projects, and there's not clarity around the North Star of what we're trying to do and the impact we're trying to have is there. Now, how do we get there? And what is it that is going to take us to that point? What are the key activities that we need to do? And the rest of this, is it critical or not? And sometimes those are very hard decisions to make. But I think being your authentic self and staying true to that and having those difficult conversations with donors is what I think ultimately will lead to better conversations between funders and donors, better relationships between funders and donors, and funding that is more aligned with the organization's missions and values than trying to Frankenstein together all sorts of different programs to appease different donors with different priorities.
Amazing. I'm going to leave it there. I'm so sorry to everybody who didn't have a question answered. There's so many, but I hope you can take away something from those questions answered. That is all we have time for today. Thank you to all the panelists for your insights into the groundbreaking initiative. And thanks to you all at home or at work listening and for your brilliant questions. To the panel, Alliance will continue to run our events program, so make sure you are signed up to our newsletter to receive invites as they are released. If you'd like to stay up to date with Ahlan Simsim, make sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. The links are in the chat. We're also going to share the LinkedIn and Twitter handles for the IRC, Lever for Change, and Sesame Workshop, as well as their websites. So if you'd like to stay in the loop, check those out. Thanks again, and I hope to see you all next time.